Some of the most terrifying parts of the world that exist are cloaked in shadows and remain hidden away from civilization, places you wouldn't dare visit. But there is something that separates these places apart from the rest. Something dark and unnerving that leaves chills running up and down your spine. In fact, some places are said to contain horrifying creatures that roam at night, searching for their next victim. But what if you were to encounter one? What if everything you believed was real was actually a facade? Have you heard of the Mothman? How about the Hythe Mothman that has settled in the darkest corners of the UK? In this video, we will be covering the stories surrounding this eerie and creepy winged creature that lurks in the shadows of night, using its glowing red eyes to pierce the soul of its victims. A monster that thrives in the nightmares of many who fear it. Let's dive in. On November 15th, 1966 in Salem, West Virginia, it was a cold Tuesday night. Not a cloud was in the sky as the Partridge family settled in for the evening on their farm. Merrill, his wife, and their 6 children warmed themselves by the fire and settled in for a night in front of the television. Their 3-year-old German Shepherd dog Bandit rested on the porch, defending his adoring family. Everything was normal, until later on in the evening when the television started to act a little strangely. The movie Wild and Wonderful was playing on screen when the signal appeared to start breaking up. There were only a few interruptions at first, but soon the entire screen was covered in an unusual pattern and began to emit a dreadful high-pitched noise that pained the family's ears. Bandit remained outdoors but began howling loudly, presumably due to the intensity of the noise. It got to the point where the television exploded unexpectedly, showering the family with fragmented glass. Despite the noise ending, Bandit continued to growl. Merrill, clearly astonished and perplexed by what had just occurred, developed an uneasy sensation and decided to go outside with his flashlight to investigate what was disturbing the dogs so much. As he went out onto the porch, Bandit raced for the neighboring tree line. Merle shouted for his typically attentive dog to return, but it ignored him. He continued to get closer to the trees, which is when he noticed it. 2 glowing red lights in the tree line, large and circular in shape. Initially, it was reported that they appeared to be eyes, but Merrill later revealed he didn't feel like there was anything biological about them. Whatever was in the trees terrified Merrill enough to rush back inside the farmhouse and grab his rifle. But when he returned, there was nothing. No trace of the lights, no trace of Bandit. In the morning, he would find Bandit's paw prints in the area. They appeared to be running around in a circle before just stopping, not demonstrating any evidence that he ran off in a different direction. That same night, just a couple of hours later, 2 young couples were driving over 100 miles away just outside of Point Pleasant when they claimed to see a strange figure standing by the side of the road. It was large, around 7 feet tall, but what was most disturbing to them was its large glowing red eyes. They began to drive away as quickly as they could when they saw in the mirror the figure had hovered up in the air and appeared to be gliding towards them at an incredible speed. It had wings. While the couples were able to finally escape, they claimed that during the chase they saw on the side of the road the remains of what appeared to be a large dog. This would be the first officially reported sighting of one of the most infamous cryptids, the Point Pleasant Mothman. A story that melded together a whole host of strange paranormal events. While history is filled with similar tales of winged men, interestingly an event took place 3 years previous to the Mothman sightings that bears a striking resemblance to the beloved winged beast. A rarely spoken about tale that seems to suggest that Mothman was possibly spotted on the other side of the Atlantic. This is the strange tale of the Hythe Mothman and the Saltwood Ghosts. November 16th, 1963, almost exactly 3 years before the sighting that would kickstart the Mothman phenomena in West Virginia, a very similar event took place, chillingly taking place at the same time of year, with the same number of young people involved, as though history would later repeat itself. 17-year-old John Flaxton, his friend Mervyn Hutchinson, and their 2 girlfriends were walking back from a dance late on that fateful night. They were alone as they walked down a peaceful country road that goes alongside Sandling Park in Hythe, a little village on the south coast of England. John was the first to notice and pointed out to his companions. The lack of light pollution made the stars in the night sky incredibly apparent, providing an idyllic overhead view for the teens. But John's attention was pulled to what he initially assumed was a shooting star. It was brighter than he would have expected, and one of his friends pointed out it wasn't just that it was brighter, it was that it was closer than all the other stars. Too close. They stared as the light moved across the sky above them, and their curiosity rapidly turned into concern as they realized the light was approaching closer and closer to them. Before, it appeared to come to a halt, hovering just ahead of them a little further down the road. It was a bright golden oval form, and the light was so strong that it was impossible to see what was behind it. Then, after what felt like several minutes, but was probably just a few seconds, the light sank behind some trees in the park. John experienced a peculiar sensation that washed over him. He immediately felt cold all over. The initial fascination had swiftly changed to fear, though they couldn't explain what they were terrified of. Just an overwhelming feeling that what they had just witnessed was not right. All four decided they wanted to get out of this circumstance as soon as possible and began running. As soon as they did, the light bounced back out from behind the trees, as if responding to them in some way. The light was now about 200 feet away from them, but the teenagers sensed something unusual. When they ran, it began to follow them quickly, but whenever they stopped, the light also stopped. Was it playing with them, or are they merely mimicking their actions? The four of them came to a halt and observed as the light hovered before disappearing behind some trees. It was as if it required them to remain motionless before proceeding with its plan. The light vanished, and all four would stand there for a moment with just the eerie silence of the night and their own heavy breathing. When suddenly, from the direction the light had vanished in, they heard the sound of a twig snapping. Then the sound of a branch breaking, followed by the unmistakable sound of large footsteps. In the tree line, a massive shadowy figure emerged from where the light had been just minutes before. Mervyn told the police later that evening that it was the size of a human, but as it stepped out from the tree line, they noted some strange aspects about this person. For one thing, it didn't appear to have a head, or at least no neck that would make a head protrude and appear more evident. He noted the feet seemed unusual, possibly webbed. Even more ominously, it appeared to have wings. Large bat-like wings protruded from its back and bent over its shoulders. The teenagers didn't wait to see what the figure wanted. They started running again, running faster than any of them had ever done before. When they were far enough away, they contacted the police. Surprisingly, 4 youngsters claimed to have seen flashing lights in the sky and a gigantic bat-part-man creature, and they were taken seriously. The police added that the dread they witnessed on these youngsters' faces informed them that, even if they were wrong about what they had seen, they had honestly seen something that night, and whatever that something was had rocked them to their core. The 4 teens were supposedly interviewed individually and described the events and what they witnessed in nearly identical terms. What happened to the 4 teens spread quickly across Kent's little community. Several newspapers covered the story, however their perspectives vary slightly from what the eyewitness described. But we will get into that later. A week later, on November 21st, 17-year-old Keith Croucher was walking alone. It was early evening, although the sun had already set. He was cutting across some fields near Sandling Estate, not far from the previous meeting, on his way home. As he approached the football field, he noticed a strange radiance reflecting off the low clouds in the night sky. Initially, he assumed that someone was training on the field and had lit it up. But when he approached and crossed the embankment that ran alongside the football ground, he witnessed something he couldn't believe. In the center of the field, there was a solid oval-shaped light surrounded by what he described as a golden mist. Yet again, the light appeared so bright that if there was anything behind it creating the illumination, it was impossible to tell. Croucher stopped and watched the light slowly gliding across the pitch. before disappearing into the darkened nearby trees and vanishing from sight. A few days later, and late one evening, a man named John McGoldrick and a companion convinced each other to conduct a small investigation. The couple had grown captivated by what Flaxton and his pals had reported seeing, and after some egging on from one another, they decided to go out to the woods near where the initial sighting occurred to see if they could see anything for themselves. While they didn't witness any glowing lights or moth-winged men that night, they did potentially find the location where Flaxton and his friends heard the breaking branches as the Mothman stepped out from the trees. McGoldrick claims to have found an area of the woods that appeared to have been crushed by something large, saying that they saw a vast expanse of bracken that had been flattened. Next to this area, they apparently found 3 well-defined footprints. They were large, measuring some 2 feet long and 9 inches across. McGoldrick reported his findings, and 2 reporters from a local paper requested that he take them out to the site of the footprints. A couple of weeks later, on December the 11th, McGoldrick's unnamed friend came along for the trip. The reporters did so with a healthy dose of skepticism, not expecting to find much more than some traces that the men could have fabricated. They did go near to the location, but they never made it far enough to see if the footprints were still there. They were trekking through the woods when a bright, brilliant light appeared several hundred feet ahead of them. All 4 men, not expecting to see something like this, were stunned. Frustratingly, they were too scared to venture closer, instead choosing to stop where they were and observe the light for half an hour before it vanished. They described the light as pulsing. These are the events laid out by John Keel in his book, Creatures from Time and Space, and effectively ends the story of the Kentish Mothman. If this event has any connection to the Point Pleasant case, we obviously have no way of knowing. Keel has spoken about many such stories throughout history, and in fact, jumping back over to West Virginia, a woman claims to have seen something similar as far back as 1960. I like to conceive of this case as the original Mothman because of the Mothman monster and the apparent UFO phenomenon surrounding it. I believe it serves as a good little prelude to the events that occurred in Point Pleasant a few years later, and it has a stronger connection to what was reported there than many other apparent sightings of winged men throughout the years. However, while this concludes Keel's version of what transpired at Hythe, as previously noted, the local newspapers at the time took a different perspective. We were 3 years away from Mothman becoming an identified entity. To describe what the inhabitants in Hythe believed was going on, we'll need to dig in a little further. There are some differences between Keel's writings and other sources on the events. According to an article on the initial witnesses, Mervyn Hutchinson described the figure as carrying a lantern, which could possibly explain the light, as well as wearing a red cloak. But I'm not sure if this is in addition to or instead of the wings reported. According to a later story, he also allegedly stated that they couldn't see ahead, implying that the figure did not have one. It also challenges how the events concluded. Instead of fleeing, the youths appear to have observed the figure shuffle up onto a nearby railway bridge before vanishing. In addition, several articles appear to have characterized the ball as a red ball of fire rather than a white oval shape. It is unclear which of these accounts is most similar to the real report presented to the police, although the original description I shared earlier in the video appears to be the most frequently accepted version of events. Not that we can totally discredit the other articles, but it seems to go against what is reported in most other versions. Another adds an additional report to the experience of John McGoldrick. It states that when they returned to the area at a later date, that they were driving along Sandling Road, but couldn't see anything. They decided to head to Sandling Quarry to see if they could find something there. They pulled up and turned off their lights, when one of the people in the car claimed to see a figure standing at the side of the road. Creepily, no one else could see it. A motorcyclist driving through this area around the same time also reported seeing a strange glowing light. Hythe is something of a hotbed for ghostly stories. Saltwood Castle is located right by Sandling Station and has its fair share of strange sightings and ghost stories. Because of this, and the fact that the Mothman was not well known at the time, the townspeople assumed that what these teenagers were seeing was a ghost. Furthermore, Reverend Eric Stanton, the local rector, declared that he would finally solve the apparent haunting in his community. There are rumors that a black magic circle meets in a secret hideout in the village, and that they are responsible. What's more remarkable is that the article appears to blame the occurrences on a specific ghost. According to the account published in the Daily Mirror, the spirit was that of William Turnay. Yes, it appears that he had the same middle and last name, a very real and very deceased rich landowner in the area who was known to be something of a reclusive individual and rather eccentric. He had purchased a tiny island situated in a lake in nearby Brockhill Park, and upon his death in 1903, requested to be buried there in what the papers of the time described as an extraordinary funeral. While his headstone is long gone, many still claim to have seen the figure of William standing on the island in the park late at night, and his former home shortly after his death was imaginatively referred to as the haunted house by the locals in the village. To add further to this strange story, Turnay was said to have had a curse placed upon him, and his father, mother, and brother had all passed away under various circumstances on the month that he too died. However, why the Reverend or the press linked this occurrence to the Mothman sightings is unclear. I can only suppose they chose to blame an apparent haunting that was already occurring in the region on other unusual phenomena observed. Nevertheless, the bizarre sightings and apparent concerns of a ghost roaming the streets of Hythe appear to be a very serious issue for the people. In the winter of 1963, one woman reported she locked and bolted her doors and windows as soon as it got dark. If Reverend Stanton ever got to the bottom of what was going on with his ghost and the Mothman is unclear, but he was quoted in one final article in late November as saying, "I don't think it's proper to reject these stories of a ghost, all the while they are disturbing the village." The area was rapidly surrounded by two groups of investigators. Mr. Strickland, a UFO investigator, was the first on the scene and discovered additional reports from locals about strange lights flying around the area, with one dog walker claiming to see a small golf ball-shaped light that crossed in front of him on Sandling Road before disappearing into the sea. This occurred a few weeks before the Mothman incident. Additionally, groups of ghost hunters started flocking to the area, especially focused on Saltwood Castle, but as far as I know, they did not encounter anything. There have been numerous sightings of a strange winged man across Kent in the decades that would follow, but then there have been similar sightings all across the world. Seemingly, no serious attempts have been made to really get to the bottom of what really happened on that cold November night, with one of the few investigations coming in the 1970s from a UFOologist who, in a claim that might be even more crazy than a 7-foot-tall Mothman, claimed that the teens had been simply spooked by a crow being illuminated by the flashing electrics of a passing train. But if these teenagers really did see a part man, part bat-like creature that night, was it the same creature that apparently terrorized Point Pleasant just a few years later? Or if they are real at all, are there many similar creatures hidden all over the world? Additionally, the creature was introduced to a wider audience by Gray Barker in 1970, and was later popularized by John Keel in his book, The Mothman Prophecies, claiming that there were paranormal events related to the sightings and a connection to the collapse of the Silver Bridge. The book was later adapted into a 2002 film starring Richard Gere. Please tell me what you think about this story by leaving a comment down below. We have ties to the Point Pleasant Mothman, unidentified flying objects, black magic, the ghost of an unusual rich gentleman buried in a park, and a priest attempting to solve the mystery. I don't think you can ask much more from a bizarre scenario. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please click the like button and subscribe for more. Thank you for hanging with me to the end. Till next time.